Hey, everybody, welcome to yet another episode of the Grossman Files. Hey. We got a great one for you today. Something just caught my eye over here. Looks like someone threw a pumpkin down over here. Let's see if there's anything special about this pumpkin. Nah, nothing. Let me tell you though, sometimes you never know what you're gonna find. One time I was out in the Seton Park woods and I was looking in one of these here and I noticed something embedded deep in one of these cracks, and I pulled it out. It turned out it was a freaking Santeria curse. It was like a candle and some wax figure and some curse in Spanish, long letter. It was kind of freaky. Anyway, we're back here in Van Cortlandt Park for another walk and talk. And today, of course, we have actually a nice focused topic. I want to thank everybody out there, of course, for indulging me the last few videos. Figured I was out here walking, take you with me. I was bored, had some things to get off my mind. And so that's basically it on that one. I said what I had to say, and I feel satisfied that the messages got through. So, of course, what are we talking about today? We are talking about Joseph Messina and the Wendy Savino shooting, which actually should be Joseph Messina. Had nothing to do with the Wendy shooting, but give me a second, someone's passing by. Some dude wearing a mask. I've been noticing the masks coming back lately, I don't know. Anyhow, so today we're gonna talk a little bit more about this Joseph Messina character and the Wendy Savino shooting. Now, of course, I've spoken about Messina many times, and Messina has been a name that's been bandied about by the conspirators, by the troglodytes, by the ball baggers, by the mouth breathers, by the worshippers of the liar, the drunkard, the wig wearer, the manipulator, the chain smoker, the not good friend, the man who was sending 1,500 feet this way when he really meant 1,500 feet that way, the spiritually sick, nasty picture lover, and the man whose mind was veritably drenched and soaked and steeped in urine. And of course, we're talking about Maury Terry. So I'm all over the place today. I'm kind of excited. I'm kind of in a good mood. Feeling great about the way things are going. Son of Sam land. Feeling particularly good about the Wendy Savino story lately. And so today I just wanted to put a little few more pieces of the puzzle together because I came into some new information. So I figured I'd share it with you. A lot of freaking hills today. I'm a little out of breath. Apologize for that. So anyway, Joseph Messina. So of course, Joseph Messina has been named by the ball bagging crew. People who know nothing about this case. People who know nothing about Son of Sam. People who ignore all the evidence. Joseph Messina has been basically named as her shooter. It's just a fact amongst these people. Joseph Messina shot Wendy Savino. And of course, the Joseph Messina story is somewhat interesting because Messina was a junkie, a thug, a killer, affiliated with a group called the Purple Gang, which had a long, violent history in modern era Mafia in New York City. Quite a few members of the Purple Gang lived in Yonkers. And that was a gang that originated out of the East Harlem area in the mid 20th century, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, when the drug trade became huge. this little group called the Purple Gang started existing. Now, don't know much about it. There's a good book called Hitmen by an author, Scott Deitche. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he has a whole book on the Purple Gang, East Harlem, and he actually had a little bit of Joseph Messina, the Joseph Messina murder, and he even mentioned the Wendy Savino shooting. So I got in touch with Scott, and he was very gracious to supply me with the extent of his knowledge and paperwork on Joseph Messina. So again, this is how you do it. You get other people involved who've spoken about aspects of this story. You see what they have to say, you get their thoughts, see if they have any material that they might be willing to share. And this guy couldn't have been nicer. And I asked him about Joseph Messina and if he knew anything more than what was in his book. And he promptly answered, and he said basically the story, which I'm going to lay out for you today. So Messina was actually written about. The Savino shooting had been written about in books, and none of us knew it. Hitman came out in 2022, so it's been around for a couple of years. So in a way, this story of Wendy has been bubbling under the surface for quite a while now. Although, again, nobody really knew it. So, getting back to our story here. Apologize for being somewhat scattered today. I'm feeling nice, I'm feeling good, I'm in a good mood. We're in a great position to be in. Looking forward to the future. Sitting on a lot of material, which is going to blow your mind. But you guys know that I'm into this Wendy story like crazy. And so I figure for those of you who are interested in taking the ride along with me on the Wendy train, that today's material will be somewhat interesting to you. So Joseph Messina, of course, these troglodytes, mouth breathers, people who think that there are no birds or bees or insects in Untermeyer Park. People actually say that. I was at Untermeyer Park and you can't hear nature there. I was there just at the end of summer. There are plenty of birds, lots of insects, deer. It's ridiculous. Anyway, these are the people talking about Joseph Messina shot Wendy Savino. So anyway, why don't we just let the material do the talking today, so we're just all on the same page with this material. And of course, we have spoken about Messina before in the past. However, today the show is dedicated to this guy and this topic, and we actually have some new information to bring you. All right, so here we go. This is from Scott Deitche's Hitman. Police were called to the Pelham around 4:30 a.m. on April 10th, 1976, when a passerby noticed that a body was lying on the street outside the restaurant. The victim had been shot twice in the front and twice in the back, and then finished off with 4 shots to the head. Whoever wanted him dead certainly made sure the job was carried out. Homicide detectives identified the body as Joseph Butch Messina, an associate of the Purple Gang, who had a long rap sheet for assault and narcotics convictions. Police were also interested in the general look of Messina. He fit the description of a shooter in an incident that happened a few hours earlier in front of another popular Bronx restaurant, Nina's on Boston Road. Wendy Savino, wife of a prominent Republican leader and ex-NYPD officer Joe Savino, was leaving Nina's restaurant with her husband. They drove separate cars. As she stepped into her Jaguar XL, a man walked up to the car and fired 5 shots into the car, hitting Miss Savino 3 times in the face, eye, and chest. She was rushed to the hospital, but was able to give the police a description of the gunman, describing a clean-shaven man about 30 years old wearing a black leather jacket, about 5 feet 9 inches tall. Police initially thought Messina was the gunman at the Savino scene due to his general appearance, but Messina had a mustache, which the Savino gunman did not. By the next day, the police had ruled out Messina as the Savino shooter and started running down leads specific to Messina's activities. They discovered that Messina was an associate of some members of the Purple Gang and followed up his movements in the hours before they found his body. Police had a strong suspicion that Michael Meldish was responsible for Messina's murder. They had information that Meldish forced Messina out of the Chateau Pelham. An unidentified trafficker was with Messina and tried to intervene. Meldish slapped the trafficker and continued to pull Messina out of the restaurant. Police were hamstrung by a lack of witnesses. Despite a reportedly crowded restaurant, police experienced extreme difficulty in identifying the patrons, much less obtaining witnesses in connections with this homicide. All right, so let's deal with what that had just said. So, Deitche gives you the general outlines of the Savino shooting, taken obviously from the New York Times article about it. Left out the smiling aspect of it, but he wasn't there doing an analysis to see if David Berkowitz shot this person. Things like that weren't important. He was talking about Messina. And the reason why, of course, Savino was brought up in context of Messina. Give me a second, there's some people walking by. Hey, Poochie Pooch. Hello. Hi, Pooch. Quite frankly, it's just bad timing. Berkowitz shot Wendy on April 9th. Messina was killed a few hours later, about 4 miles away, at a place called the Chateau Pelham. So 2 homicides occurring close enough to one another that, of course, the police are going to be interested in if there's a connection. But as the article rightly pointed out, there was no connection because Messina did not match the Savino shooter. As you know, as seen in the sketch, the dead ringer for David Berkowitz, the sketch that any sane person agrees looks the most like David Berkowitz out of any sketch made in the Son of Sam era and inserted into that those crime files. In that sketch, you see 5'9", 160, and generally more burly appearance, which is very in line with Berkowitz's actual appearance. While Messina was 5'6", he was 125 pounds. He was a stone cold junkie. And he had a thick handlebar mustache. And the Savino sketch and Savino herself, very emphatic and clear that there was no facial hair whatsoever on the shooter. So the police ruled Messina out literally the next morning. I've seen the files. Eventually you're gonna see the files too. And you're gonna see that this whole time I've been telling you the truth. It was Messina's general appearance that ruled him out as being the Savino shooter. The only similarity was leather jacket. But who cares? Leather jackets. This was so ubiquitous and common in 1976 Bronx. Excuse me, give me a second here. So we're coming up to the Yonkers border. So I wanted to see if Deitche knew more about Messina, because oftentimes things get edited out of books, they're not put in there. So I got in touch with the guy, and he was very gracious in his reply. He said that he just basically put in the book what he knew about the case, and it wasn't really a huge part of his overall narrative, so he didn't give it much thought. You know, very honest and forthright and realistic answer. He wasn't writing a book about Savino. He even put in a few mistakes from the newspaper article and didn't know that they were mistakes, showing again that his intent wasn't to solve the shooting of Wendy Savino. So He basically put in what I read to you, that this dude was at Chateau Pelham, a restaurant a few miles away from Nina's, and somehow or other he ran afoul of this dude called Michael Meldish. Now, I'm just started getting my feet wet in this Purple Gang thing, but apparently Michael Meldish and his brother Joseph Meldish were extremely violent hitmen working for various families of the New York City Mafia. Again, I'm not sitting here doing a history of the Meldish brothers, but it's clear that Meldish had something to do with Messina's disappearance. So, give me a second. I just want to get away from that person. So we're starting to get a different picture here of this Messina character. Not only did he not look anything like the sketch, had no physical resemblance whatsoever to the sketch in facial or body characteristic, but now we're getting a wider picture of this guy, that he was affiliated with this thing called the Purple Gang. So for those of you interested, read Scott's book about the Purple Gang. I just finished it. I'm reading out of it for you here now. We're updating our knowledge about this case through the work of a contemporary author, which is really good. One who's a nice guy, too. So, big ups to Scott Deitche. And I have the files. We're going to show them as soon as I get up this freaking hill. He was gracious enough to send me the files that he used to write that section of the book. So let me just kind of like walk a little, catch my breath. You guys can look at this beautiful Van Cortlandt Park, of course. All of a sudden it turns to Yonkers. But down here in the Bronx, it's all woods. Would have been awesome to grow up here. One of these buildings or houses. You basically have all of Van Cortlandt as your backyard. So Joseph Messina, the associate, the narcotics addict, the assaulter, the person who made people pissed off at him through his actions and was affiliated with a whole network of violent criminals. He ends up dead the same night that Wendy is. And I get it, yo. I get the attraction to turn Wendy's case into a mob case. I get the attraction to turn Messina into her shooter. Listen, none less than Paul Mescal himself, the crime writer for the Daily News, was rocking this case the night of. He's the person responsible for bringing you the two men driving away, which never happened, and pushing this whole mob angle. And in his initial articles, he outright named Messina as the shooter, thereby poisoning the mind of the current troglodyte, the current ball bagger, critics of the Savino case, who aren't being honest in their approach. I don't care about if you believe in the case or not. I've said it a million times. Disbelieve Wendy, but at least deal with the actual real world evidence, circumstantial though it may be, which points to Berkowitz's guilt, as well as his behavior after being caught out for this shooting, which he thought would never be exposed. The dude lied through his teeth to the cops, and then he put out a false story to his current followers, the Amazon wish list buyers, the I love you sign offers. These people are sick. They actually profess love for Berkowitz. So I get it. I get the attraction to turn Messina into Wendy's shooter. It just makes sense. It fits in, of course, with your preconditioned biases against the Italian people, right? We're conditioned to think that anyone with an Italian last name in the Bronx is automatically mob. But at some point, you just got to deal with reality. And of course, the first part of that reality with the Savino case that you need to understand before you understand anything else is that Wendy herself has been saying that Berkowitz shot her since the day after he was arrested. She went to the Bronx DA in October of '77 and told them this and was summarily ignored. She's been talking about this. We just accidentally stumbled into her story, which was a great moment of synchronicity for our video series. But we didn't invent this story, and we're not setting the narrative on it. We're dealing with the facts as we're presented. We have positive ID from a witness, and then of course we have this investigation into Joseph Messina that was played out in the press initially to push some notion of mob involvement in this case, and then of course summarily dismissed the next morning. But to the extent that the public cared and followed on this case, I bet you most people got their initial thoughts about it from that first article and didn't read the retraction in the paper the next day about how Messina was ruled out. But anyway, Messina was not the shooter of Wendy, although his shooting had an unfortunate timing of happening the same night that Berkowitz decided to shoot possibly his first shooting victim. So I have these DEA files here that Deitche shared with me, and we're going to read them because this is it. This is how I do my work. I deal with reality as presently constituted. I deal with the real world. So let's read these files regarding Joseph Messina and his shooting. Because again, adding to the pieces of the puzzle on the Wendy shooting. If you believe that Wendy was shot by Messina, then hopefully this video will at least educate you more on the subject. I'm not saying believe this. Come to your own conclusions. I'm telling you my conclusions. I have very strong opinions about these things. But it's always better to have more information than less. So this came from the DEA, December 7th, 1976. So actually quite a ways later, after the investigation was done for several months. Remember, all this took place in April, so you're talking about almost 6-7 months. Joseph Messina, Butch, was an associate of members of the Purple Gang. Messina was found in front of the Chateau Pelham, Bronx, New York, after being shot numerous times in the head and chest on April 10th, 1976. Michael Meldish, I was told that's the name under the redaction, an original member of the Purple Gang, is a prime suspect in the murder of Messina. On April 10th, 1976, the body of Joseph Messina was found in front of the Chateau Pelham, 3250 Westchester Avenue, Bronx, New York. Messina was the victim of a homicide, shot numerous times in the head and chest. The homicide investigation is being conducted by the 8th Homicide Zone. The investigating officers have developed unsubstantiated information that Michael Meldish physically forced Messina out of the Chateau Pelham over the objections of, and then that's redacted. Okay, the redacted person is a well-documented narcotics trafficker who was slapped in the face for his attempted intervention. Although the investigators theorized that there were approximately 50 persons present while Messina was inside the Chateau Pelham, they have experienced extreme difficulty in identifying the patrons, much less obtain witnesses in connections with this homicide. And as far as I know, that's where it ended up. As far as I know, the investigation into Messina is cold ever since. So unsubstantiated, I get it. But the pieces fit a lot more with a mob rub out of this guy for other activities, not having to do with the shooting of Wendy Savino and just the unfortunate bad timing that he happened to get shot a few hours later. But it was 1970s New York. There were dozens of homicides a day. Some even occurring near each other and close in time to one another. So you can't say that the proximity of this happening had any meaning. And of course, you always have to go back to the all-important eyewitness statement of Wendy Savino, who not only says that her shooter was David Berkowitz, but also said clearly, and from the first minute that she was able to give a description, that the guy was clean shaven, 5'9", and 160 pounds. Okay. Now I'm just going to hit you up with something I remember from the Savino files, which is actually going to work more in my favor. But in terms of that, but on the original complaint report, the weight that Wendy gave was actually 180, 5'9" and 180, which is like a dead ringer for Berkowitz's height and weight. But in either case, the sketch does say 160. And so we'll take it at 160, but again, Messina, 125. He was 5'6". He was a stone cold junkie with a handlebar mustache. The only similarity was that he was wearing a leather jacket. So anyway, that's basically it. I'm gonna just give this another minute or so while I think about if there's anything else I want to talk about, while you guys look at the beautiful and sylvan visage of Van Cortlandt Park. All right, I'm just thinking maybe I should just sum up everything we did today. So of course, today was a deeper investigation into the homicide of Joseph Messina, who has been mentioned by the ballbagger contingent of people who believe that there was satanistic, truistic activities. Untermeyer Park. These are the people saying Messina was the shooter of Wendy Savino. So we learned a little bit more about this guy. We learned that he was an associate of the Purple Gang. Purple Gang was an established mob thing. So far, nobody's been able to show a relation between Joe Savino and the Purple Gang, which is what you would have to do. And then of course you'd have to establish that they were actually in concert working together to have Joseph Messina kill Wendy Savino. Because when you're doing criminal work like this, you actually have to be the police. You have to get it to a point where you would get a conviction in a court of law. It's all well and good to like say that because somebody was mentioned in a newspaper article here, and then the name is also in Maury Terry's files, that somehow or other that's indicative of a criminal conspiracy. No, it just means that a name's in one piece of paper and a name is scribbled on another piece of paper. So I'm giving hints and tips to people who want to connect Messina to the Savino shooting. You're going to have to establish connections, and then you're going to have to get those people in a room conspiring with one another. So good luck with that. Back in the real world, I'll just deal with the eyewitness statement. 5'9", 160 to 180 pounds, clean shaven. Compare that with Joseph Messina's description, and of course the sociological facts that we have now of this guy's affiliation with something called the Purple Gang. That Michael Meldish was considered a prime suspect in the shooting, that they couldn't find any witnesses because, of course, Chateau Pelham must have been the most mobbed up spot one of the most mobbed up spots in the Bronx. I'm just talking out my ass. I don't know that for a fact. But if you have all these eyewitnesses not talking, and you have Michael Meldish slapping publicly a narcotics trafficker whilst pulling Joseph Messina out of the bar forcefully, well, I think that we're dealing with a mob's affiliations location. Which makes sense, of course, because of Messina's affiliation with this thing called the Purple Gang and Michael Meldish's thing called the Purple Gang. So Messina's murder, if it's ever going to be solved, which it's not, let's just face facts of the real world as presently constituted, it's not going to be solved ever. It had something to do with his nexus of the Purple Gang and Michael Meldish. I don't know how many more times I can say it. So I think what we wanted to get done today, we got done. And this was a rather fun video for me to make. I'm having a hard time, of course, coming up with good content for all y'all out there in Son of Sam lately. And I know that I'm basically either ranting, musing, or talking about things today which don't really move the needle all that much. But actually they do. If you're a nerd and you actually care about the cases that we're discussing, well, today's show is great for you because now you have more information than you did before. But that's on you. I can't control those things, nor do I care to. I'm just out here doing my thing, enjoying bringing you Son of Sam content like we do. Enjoying the actual process of discovery. And yes, I said process. Can you believe there's actually people who think that I'm doing this on behalf of the process? It's ridiculous. So anyhow, all right, I don't know. I don't have anything else to say. Take you with me for another minute or so. Maybe I'll have some inspiration. So yeah, I mean, basically we're in this sort of dead zone. You already know I'm sitting on a treasure trove of fun new documents, some of which not only teach us about the case of the Son of Sam case, but also more about David Berkowitz, but also more importantly more about Maury Terry. Because we're gonna see more evidence of how this guy lied, how he bullied, manipulated, abused, selectively edited. It's all there waiting. And of course, I already told you about some affiliation with Netflix, which may or may never come to light, which I know basically next to nothing about. And then of course there's this shadowy thing of possibly another media venture happening, which I'm really hoping for. But basically I'm going for broke. Like, I'm hoping that whatever happens with these documentaries that may or may not be coming out, my hope is that they catapult me into some new aspect of my life, and that's kind of really all I can think about at this point. And if they don't, whatever, I'll just move on, do something else. But the days of doing Son of Sam content like this, well, they got to come to an end at some point. I think 2025 is going to be that year where all of this kind of gets put to bed in one way or another. Either I get on some big form documentary that propels us into a little bit more of the public's eye, or I just do the last bit on YouTube with all my material and then say goodbye to all y'all when I get the hell out of here, because I ain't getting old in New York City, folks. And if anyone is here living in any of these cities which are rampant with filth, crime, degeneracy, absolute lawlessness, I suggest that you start thinking very heavily about your future as well. All right, so that's basically all I have to say. As we end another one of these Super fun for me anyway. Walk and talks in Van Cortlandt Park. All right, guys, we'll see you soon, all right? Take care.